How to learn English. Elara lived in a quiet town, her dreams often transcending the familiar cobblestones. She yearned to connect with the world, specifically through English, a language that seemed both distant and inviting. The thought of fluency filled her with a peculiar mix of excitement and dread. Every dictionary she opened felt like a mountainous task, an insurmountable wall of unknown vocabulary. How to learn English, she'd often murmur to herself, staring at her reflection. The question echoed her deep-seated desire, yet the path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty. She tried various methods, from rote memorization of verb conjugations to endless grammar exercises, but progress felt excruciatingly slow, almost non-existent. One significant hurdle that consistently tripped her up was remembering words. They would enter her mind momentarily, like fleeting butterflies, only to vanish without a trace minutes later. She'd repeat new vocabulary endlessly, only to find herself drawing a blank during conversations. This cycle of acquisition and forgetting was incredibly disheartening. How to remember words became another haunting question. She tried flashcards, apps, and even sticky notes plastered all over her room. Yet, the vast ocean of English vocabulary seemed determined to resist her efforts, pushing her back to the shore of frustration with relentless waves of forgetfulness. But the absolute worst part was the fear of making mistakes. It paralyzed her. The moment she considered speaking, a cold wave of anxiety would wash over her. What if she mispronounced a word? What if her grammar was completely wrong? The hypothetical embarrassment was unbearable, a heavy cloak she wore constantly. "I don't want to make mistakes, but I always do," she confessed to her journal one evening, the ink blurring slightly from a teardrop. This self-inflicted pressure was immense, transforming every potential conversation into a high-stakes performance she was destined to fail. Her confidence eroded with each perceived error. She avoided opportunities to speak, preferring to listen silently, internalizing conversations rather than participating. This isolation, while protecting her from potential blunders, also prevented any real progress. The English she learned remained theoretical, trapped within the pages of her textbooks, never truly alive. One rainy afternoon, browsing through an old bookshop, she stumbled upon a dusty volume titled Tales from the World. It promised to teach English through captivating narratives. Skeptical but desperate, Elara bought it. Could stories really be the key to unlocking this complex language? Learn English through stories? She pondered, flipping through the pages. The concept was novel, a departure from her rigid, academic approach. She began reading, slowly at first, then with increasing enjoyment. The words, embedded in context, seemed to stick better, painting vivid pictures in her mind. Each story was a journey, a mini-adventure. She wasn't just learning words, she was experiencing them. The old wizard lived in a secluded cave, read one passage, and suddenly secluded wasn't just a word. It was the quiet, moss-covered entrance to a magical dwelling. This method felt different. The characters' emotions, their dialogues, the twists and turns of the plot, all contributed to a richer understanding of the language. Vocabulary she'd struggled with before now made sense within the narrative arc. It was as if the stories were gently embedding the words into her long-term memory. Days turned into weeks, and Elara devoured stories. She discovered that remembering words became almost effortless when they were connected to a vivid scene, or an emotional moment. The fear of forgetting lessened as her mental library of contextualized vocabulary grew steadily. Her passive understanding of English improved dramatically. She could read articles, watch movies with subtitles, and even follow podcasts with greater ease. But the speaking aspect, the direct interaction, still loomed large, a mountain yet to be climbed. Her fear of mistakes persisted stubbornly. One day, the book included a small, encouraging note. "Let me tell you talking tips." It suggested finding a speaking partner, even if it was just talking to herself in front of a mirror. The idea felt silly, but the stories had taught her to be open to new approaches. How to talk in English. She practiced in front of her mirror, forcing out hesitant phrases. Her reflections seemed to judge her, magnifying every stumble, every grammatical error. It was excruciating, but she reminded herself of the adventurous characters in her stories who faced their fears. The book further suggested recording her voice and listening back. This was even more uncomfortable. Hearing her own awkward pauses and mispronunciations felt like nails on a chalkboard. Yet, she persevered, driven by the newfound hope that stories had instilled in her learning journey. She learned to identify her common mistakes by listening to her recordings. It wasn't about perfection, but about progress. The book emphasized that fluency wasn't about speaking flawlessly, but about communicating effectively. This realization was a small but significant shift in her mindset. How other people talk in English, she started noticing. She paid attention to podcasts, interviews, and even snippets of conversation she overheard. She observed their rhythm, their intonation, the way they connected ideas. It was an anthropological study of real-life communication. She realized that native speakers also made pauses, used filler words, and sometimes corrected themselves mid-sentence. They weren't robots. This observation was immensely reassuring. Her ideal of perfect English began to crack, allowing a more realistic and forgiving perspective to emerge. The book then proposed a bold step, finding a language exchange partner online. This felt terrifying. Interacting with a real, live human being, someone who wasn't a fictional character or her own reflection, was a huge leap. Her stomach churned with apprehension, yet curiosity gnawed. How to talk with anyone, she whispered, her finger hovering over the send button for her first message. The story characters she admired were brave, facing dragons and dark forests. Surely, she could face a video call with a friendly stranger from across the globe. Her first conversation was awkward, filled with long silences and mumbled words. She made countless mistakes, tripping over pronouns and mixing up tenses. Her partner, a kind student from Canada named Liam, was patient and encouraging, which helped immensely despite her embarrassment. After the call, a familiar wave of self-criticism washed over her. "Why do I always make mistakes?" she lamented, feeling the sting of imperfection. It felt like she was back to square one, despite all the progress with stories and self-practice. The frustration was palpable. But then she remembered a quote from one of her favorite stories. "The path to mastery is paved with countless missteps, each one a lesson." It wasn't about not making mistakes. It was about learning from them, about daring to try again, even after stumbling. She began to view her mistakes not as failures, but as valuable feedback. Each incorrect sentence highlighted an area for improvement. It was like a compass guiding her learning, pointing her towards specific grammatical structures or vocabulary she needed to review. With each subsequent call with Liam, Elara found her confidence slowly blossoming. She still made errors, of course, but the fear diminished. She focused on conveying her message, on connecting with Liam, rather than on achieving flawless pronunciation or grammar. Liam shared his own language learning journey, emphasizing that everyone makes mistakes. He told her stories of his initial struggles with French, his funny blunders, and how embracing imperfection was crucial for progress. His honesty was incredibly liberating for Elara. Elara started noticing a shift. The English words she learned from stories now flowed more naturally into her conversations. The narratives provided not just vocabulary, but also contextual patterns, phrases, and natural expressions she could adapt and use. She also began listening more actively to how other people talk in English during these conversations. She'd pick up on Liam's phrasing, his choice of words, and try to incorporate similar structures into her own speech. It was unconscious imitation, a powerful learning tool. Her vocabulary retention improved significantly. When a new word came up in conversation, it often reminded her of a story character or scene, cementing it in her memory more effectively than any flashcard ever could. The connections were finally forming. Elara embraced the "let me tell you" talking tips more fully. She found a local English conversation group, pushing herself outside her comfort zone even further. The group was diverse, filled with learners from all backgrounds, sharing a common goal. In the group, she practiced how to talk with anyone in a safe and supportive environment. They discussed everything from daily routines to philosophical concepts, stumbling and laughing along the way. The shared vulnerability made the process less intimidating. She realized that asking questions was a key part of communication, not a sign of weakness. If she didn't understand something, she asked. If she forgot a word, she described it until her listener understood. This adaptability was a game changer for her confidence. The fear of "why I always make mistakes" started to dissipate. She saw that everyone, even advanced speakers, occasionally fumbled. It was part of being human, part of the dynamic nature of language. The pressure she once felt was slowly lifting from her shoulders. One evening, while talking to a new friend in the group, Elara found herself speaking fluently for several minutes without a single conscious thought about grammar or vocabulary. The words just flowed, effortlessly, almost magically. It was an exhilarating moment of breakthrough. She hadn't achieved perfection, but she had achieved flow. This was the true essence of how to talk in English, to express herself freely, to connect, to share her thoughts without internal censorship. The years of struggle were finally yielding tangible results. Her journey had transformed. It wasn't about overcoming a defect, but about cultivating a skill. She now understood that how to learn English wasn't a single rigid path, but a flexible, iterative process of exploration, practice, and self-compassion. The stories had opened her mind, not just to the language, but to the idea of continuous growth. Each narrative was a reminder that challenges were opportunities, and that perseverance was the real magic. She carried these lessons into every aspect of her life. Remembering words was no longer a chore. They were anchors in her mental landscape, linked to the adventures of brave knights, mischievous fairies, and wise old philosophers. Every new word was an invitation to expand her narrative world, enriching her communication. The concept of how to remember words had evolved from rote memorization to contextual immersion. She now recommended reading widely, especially in genres that sparked personal interest, ensuring the learning process remained engaging and deeply personal for learners. The fear of, I don't want to make mistakes, but I always why transformed into an understanding that mistakes are merely stepping stones. They are unavoidable, even necessary, parts of the learning curve. They indicate where focus is needed, guiding the next steps. She even started embracing her mistakes, sometimes laughing at herself and correcting them playfully. This lighthearted approach made learning much more enjoyable and less stressful. The joy of communication far outweighed the fleeting awkwardness of a slip-up. Learn English through stories became her mantra. She encouraged others to find narratives that resonated with them, whether they were fantasy novels, true crime podcasts, or historical biographies. The key was engagement, finding joy in the journey. She often shared her own journey, explaining, "Let me tell you talking tips," based on her real-world experience. Her advice was practical and empathetic, focusing on overcoming the psychological barriers that often hinder language learners from making progress. Her top tip for how to talk in English was simple: just start. Don't wait for perfection. Find safe spaces, like a language partner or a supportive group, and begin to articulate your thoughts, no matter how basic or flawed they might initially seem. She taught people to observe how other people talk in English, not to imitate perfectly, but to understand the natural flow and rhythm, to pick up on common idioms and expressions. This passive observation greatly enhanced her active speaking ability over time. How to talk with anyone involved active listening and genuine curiosity. It was about making the other person feel heard, asking follow-up questions, and being present in the conversation. English became a tool for connection, not just a set of rules. She no longer agonized over why I always make mistakes. Instead, she reflected on them briefly, corrected them if possible, and moved on. The continuous forward momentum was far more important than achieving an elusive, flawless linguistic performance. Elara, once hesitant and self-conscious, became an English conversationalist. She could discuss complex topics, share her opinions, and even crack jokes. Her transformation was profound, a testament to resilience and the power of embracing a new learning philosophy. Her story became an inspiration to many. She proved that the fear of error can be overcome, that words can be remembered, and that fluency is not just for the gifted, but for anyone willing to embark on the journey with an open heart and persistent spirit. She found immense joy in helping others navigate their own English learning paths, sharing her insights freely. The fear that once bound her had been replaced by a deep sense of purpose, a desire to empower fellow learners worldwide to conquer their linguistic anxieties. Her personal story was a living example of how embracing vulnerability and focusing on communication rather than perfection leads to true progress. She became a beacon of hope for those feeling overwhelmed by the vastness and complexity of the English language. Elara now travels, using her English skills to connect with people from different cultures, sharing stories and learning from their experiences. Her initial dream, once so daunting, had become her beautiful reality, richer and more fulfilling than she had ever imagined possible. The journey continues, of course. Language learning is a lifelong adventure, full of new discoveries and subtle nuances. But now, Elara approaches it with curiosity and excitement, knowing that every interaction, every new word, adds another vibrant thread to her life's rich tapestry. And so, Elara, the girl who feared mistakes, became Elara, the confident communicator, proving that the most effective way to learn English is to dare to speak, to embrace the journey, and to let your unique story unfold, one brave word at a time.